All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to episode 20 of MEAD Matters, brought to you by the American Mead Makers Association's Home Governing Committee. And this is our 20th episode of the series. We're going to be talking with the top three finalists in the 2024 National Mead Maker of the Year competition circuit. My name is Arthur Franke. I'm your host and HGC member. We have a number of questions that we've put together for this panel, but also do welcome any questions that folks have as we go along. I would ask folks that are able to put them into the chat or as we go along, we'll try to field those and bring them to our panelists. We are recording this session. I would ask that folks abide by appropriate kind of microphone hygiene, and if that is an issue for everyone, or would ask folks to drop off. We're going to be working over the course of the next hour and 15 to talk through each of our panelists' experiences over before, during, and after the 2024 Mead Maker of the Year circuit. And hopefully learn some things, hear some how they approach their competitions, their recipes, and hopefully have some fun. So before we dive into it, I'll introduce number one, congratulations to Steve Fletty, our 2024 National Mead Maker of the Year. Steve is a two-time Mead Maker of the Year with the American Homebrewers Association and Mazer Cup winner. He's affiliated with the St. Paul Homebrewers Club. Second place, Kyle Ducharme, award-winning mead maker, mead and beer and cider judge as well from Vermont, affiliated with the Green Mountain Mashers. And Michael Harper, going by Harper, mead maker of 25 years tenure from Maryland. Welcome to all three of you, and congratulations all around.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
So first off, Steve, congratulations again. You have certainly a winning career spanning multiple decades of mead competitions. What does this win mean to you?
Means a lot because I've made a run at it before and I wasn't very lucky and didn't this year just things seem or last year's thing just seemed to work out. Although it was a bit close at the end and Kyle gave me a big scare there. It was just something fun to do and I really enjoyed competing and yeah, it was got some good feedback and really enjoyed it.
Wonderful. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Kyle, you've certainly made a name for yourself in recent competition circuits within the mead community over the past couple of years. Seen you grabbing medals from competitions across the country. Did you intend, starting the year, did you intend to get this far? And how does it feel to have landed a runner-up by only 6 points?
So yeah, I'm kind of kicking myself for not entering Domris. But there were only 5 meads that were able to be entered for that. So it's not like it's the big one, but at the same time, I didn't want to enter Domris, and it was kind of like last on my mind, so I kind of forgot it. But I was thrilled to do as well as I did, especially like in Mazer Cup and Valkyrie's Horn and Valhalla at the end, especially was really fun just to have a chance at it. And I'm really proud of all of us for bringing up the mead game, and it was just a fun way to compete against the best. That's really what this competition means to me, and to have my name up there is awesome.
And last but not least, Harper, you shared with me before our panel that this was really your first year making a serious foray into mead competitions. You've certainly done well. Well done.
Thank you.
What does it feel like to have accomplished a top 3 finish on your first foray?
It feels really, really good, but also it just kind of ignites that internal competition fire where, it feeds the fuel to want to enter more competitions, not only for this award, but also just writ large to kind of hone my craft and get a little bit better at my recipes and get that crucial feedback from judges. So, I was pleased with with this year's showing. But again, it just kind of whets the appetite for the next series coming up.
Very good. So I'd like to step through a couple of different questions related to how each of you approach the competition year. Certainly the MMA circuit is with near half a dozen different competitions scattered across the calendar year. It's somewhat of a marathon. How much consideration do you put into the circuit before the start of the year? Are you selecting meads from your library, brewing selectively going into the year? Um, would you mind sharing a little bit of light on how you prepare? Oh, Steve, you're on. I think you're on mute.
Zoom
Thanks for
101.
fielding it.
I look at it as you have to have an array of things. You've got to have a trad, you've got to have some fruit things, you've got to have something spiced, probably a number of fruit things really. Probably a sizer, probably some sort of melomel, a berry thing. So a wide palette of things that you can throw at the comp. Um, I hadn't really planned to compete last year. Just I did well in Valkyrie, so I said, hey, let's just give it a shot. And I didn't really have much new. I had a bit of a lull in end of 23, early 24, and so I was frantically trying to ferment things and reaching into the pantry and dragging out kegs and what do I have and so it was tough.
How much of what each of you brew is to cover categories going into a competition? Trying to play the percentages on how many different tables you can cover.
Maybe 20%. You've got to, I made a dry mead, a dry trad to, try to, get another category in there.
Yeah, I was gonna say, especially for Mazer and Valkyrie's Horn, where there's more split categories, just having some dry things in the wings, depending on how it breaks down, is really helpful to get some medals there, especially in some of the ones that are a little bit smaller entry count. So sometimes I would leave some things on the drier side, and then maybe that would just be for specifically just for Mazer or Valkyries and nothing else. And then I would then balance to something a little bit sweeter to then bring to another competition where either their categories are more collapsed and condensed. But yeah, in terms of sweetness levels, but also things I like to drink, I would say 30%, something like that, probably doctoring for competitions. But for the most part, it's just things I want to make.
Yeah, I usually approach this so I don't make very big batches at all. So I'm always behind the power curve when it comes to trying to plan. And usually before the next competition, I'm bottling things probably a couple weeks before. Um, and so that's probably a gap in my swing where I need to plan a little bit more deliberately. Um, I don't have a wide range of things I do. I think one of the things that I need to improve on is probably the dry meats because everything I've made so far that's a dry meat is pretty reprehensible, honestly. Um, but it's just trying to put a few more arrows in my quiver so that moving forward, and I'm being a little bit more deliberate in my planning, brewing some things so I have a little bit more of a selection. I can pick and choose rather than just well, this is what I've got and this is what I'm going to send. And a lot of the times, those are not ones I've submitted to competitions. I'm like, well, now's a good time to find out if they're any good or not. And sometimes they do well, and sometimes not so well.
Can you give me an example of a category that you don't necessarily make for yourself, but might make only for competitions? I've heard drier things mentioned a couple times.
For me, I don't necessarily make big, huge, like Ken Schramm style fruit bombs. I might make one once a year, but I think it's something that you need because certain regions of the country like those things, and certain regions of the country think that's what mead is. They don't. They have a very narrow range on their perception of sweetness levels and what a mead can and should be.
Yeah, I would say with me, it's some historical stuff. Like I made a Tej one time that meddled that wasn't like very good, but I knew it'd be in one of those smaller categories. So I figured I would make that for a couple of reasons of just exploring, but also sending. But yeah, definitely more towards the dry side, I would say, are things that I gravitate towards our competition focus. But yeah, I mean, even with just the fruit, like with the sizer, for example, like, oh, maybe this batch I won't add spices or whatever to make it fruit and spice, or maybe with this recipe I've had in the past, I'm not gonna doctor it up to make it a melomel. I'm just gonna have this one fruit and focus on that type, so I can enter it as a berry mead or a stone fruit. Um, so that's definitely worth considering that I probably wouldn't have considered as much if I didn't enter as many competitions.
Generally, I when I'm brewing for well, I usually brew things that I personally would like to drink, and tend to have a sweet palate, so that kind of locks me into a certain range. So what's really been challenging for me, even during the 24 competition, was trying to break out of that mold and make things that I think that other people would enjoy, that are kind of outside the limits of my palate. But that's really hard to judge too. So I've got a lot of friends that I use as guinea pigs. I'm like, hey, try this, and to Steve's point, I think people are predisposed on what they think meat should taste like, maybe on, if they drink meat and they haven't really enjoyed it before. So it's really nice to give somebody something like, oh, this is not what I expected. So when I give somebody something like that, that's really good. And I didn't expect that. I'm like, well, then maybe that's something they need to lock into and try to replicate. But that's about as deliberate as I get in the process. But I'm trying again to expand the range of things I make to cover some other categories, because if you hit one out of the park, it's great. But the ones that miss, there you are.
Speaking of folks' expectations about what mead should taste like, and Steve, your comment on sometimes the expectation that there should be bigger, bolder, sweeter profiles in particular categories. A lot of folks do talk about regional differences in competitions, or the sugar belt encompassing folks who expect sweeter meads. Can you give an example of where you considered this in either what entries you were sending to a particular competition, or where you were building a batch specifically to cater to those palates?
Yeah, I learned the hard way. A few years ago, I did really well at Valkyries, and I entered the same. I got a bunch of golds like 3, 4 years ago, and I was like, oh, I'm going to send these out to Valhalla, and all of them scored 10 to 15, and maybe even 20 points lower.
Wow.
Meads that had gotten gold medals at Valkyries, and I'm not saying I should have won, but I'm like, there's a huge perception of difference. I was like, I and I talked to another guy, and he said, I asked him, what did you think about the judging out there? And he said, they trashed my best mead. So there is regional bias, and I think it's unfortunate. I'm not sure how to explain it.
I think one of the areas of regional bias is also just like how active that meat community is, how active those judges are, how who do they interact with? Do they even know like what avocado honey tastes like? That kind of stuff,
Right.
where it's like it's incredible to go travel to some of these areas and hear across the room like, oh, you don't know what avocado blossom tastes like, or you don't know orange blossom like isn't supposed to be just orange. Like what the heck? Like this is this is just basic stuff that like requires as the serious mead judge, it requires traveling, requires making, requires being active with your craft. And I definitely run into so many people. It's like, oh, I made mead like 15 years ago, and I'm a beer judge, and I wanted to get this credential. And it's like, I can already tell that you're going to learn something when you're sitting with me today. But there's definitely, I think that's definitely more of the kind of bias that I've seen when I've judged in areas.
Yeah, and to both your points, I think that, so again, I haven't been competing long enough to really speak intelligibly about the sugar belt, but I learned again the hard way, to Steve's point, that I've got a muscadine piment that I know that if it's somewhere in the low country, like Domrus, that they know what a muscadine grape is, and the flavor profiles that go with it. Because I'm originally from Wyoming, and I entered a choke cherry mead, which by and large people don't know what a choke cherry is. Like when they hear choke cherry, they think this is a cherry, and it's really anything but. So I've seen judges like sit there and Google like what a choke cherry is and what the color should look like. And so again, you kind of learn the hard way, like, well, maybe this is not the venue or the area geographically to enter something like this, because they don't really know what that palate profile is supposed to taste like.
Hmm.
So, and I have also had experiences where I've sent meads that have done really well in metal, and I send the exact same batch to another competition, and it does significantly less well, I will say, than what it had done. So you have a gold medal winner and something that's going to the best of show, and another mead competition, it's not even coming up on the radar. So it's a little aggravating, and this is just one of these things that I'm going to have to learn how to navigate and kind of pick my spots a little bit better.
And the frustrating thing is the comments from the judges can vary hugely from region to region. And it's like it's like they don't get out of their own backyard. They don't interact with anybody else.
I'd love to maybe tease on that thread a little bit. At your level of competition, the three of you, what kind of feedback are you looking for from judges? Say you just got a best of show, each of you got at least one this year. Um, Say you just got a best of show and there's feedback on that sheet. What is helpful versus what is not?
I'm looking for balance comments. I'm looking for what their perceptions of uh, complexity and depth, and what are they perceiving? Because sometimes I'll make something and think I like it, but I've never played with these flavors before, and so I'll send it in hoping, or just to see what happens, just to see and sometimes you have to give up on a mead. It's like, this one's not going to work, Steve. And other times you're surprised, like, oh, wow, I didn't think they'd like that. Or.
Yeah, I would say sensory for sure, just as many descriptions as possible when it comes to what they're perceiving. I don't want to hear about if there's like one or two extra bubbles, if it's not like the perfect clarity thing, like brilliant versus just normal clear. Some of that stuff, it matters a little bit to me, but I'm more interested in their overall impression, especially if it's a palette I recognize, like in terms of they've maybe judged my stuff before. I maybe know some of their meads. I That kind of thing. But I'm definitely interested in some of that, and I do sometimes get really good sensory feedback that doesn't have the scores that really correspond with it. And sometimes that's from a lot of beer judges who then dock a lot of points on things that really should just be pretty minute when it comes to um, like in appearance, for example. They would then dock it a lot more. They then talk about in their overall comments of, yeah, this would have been the best meat in the room if it wasn't like slightly more. If it was a little bit more clear, it'd be the best meat in the room. I'm like, you're missing a little bit of the point here. Um, so I definitely just try to see trends when it comes to some of the feedback of about balance, and yeah, I want to enter these competitions to win medals, but I also want to win. I want to get perceptions of people that also make a lot of mead, people that judge mead. So I'm kind of hoping that my mead ends up in front of somebody that knows what the heck they're talking about and what the heck that and they're practiced. Sometimes it doesn't happen, but it's part of the game.
Right. It's the luck of the draw. Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes you get the fantastic judge, and sometimes you get, and beer judges with no meat experience, especially some high-ranking beer judges with no meat experience, can be the worst meat judges.
Yeah, I tend to agree, and I think to both your points, when I'm looking at judges' feedbacks, I want comments on balance and tan and acid balance, and just some things that will help kind of prompt me to maybe tweak the recipe a little bit to get to a higher score level, a more drinkability. But I think it's a little counterproductive, and that's probably the nicest term I can use um, when some judges, and again, you get really experienced judges, you get beer judges, you get people who are there, and I appreciate anybody who gives their time to sit down and judge a mead competition and try to gather experience. But when you really get no feedback, right? So there's no justification for how high or low it's scored, or sometimes I think the comments are a little counterproductive. It's like, let's not be so critical, and just not try to impress me with your resume of what a great mead judge you are, but just let's talk about what you drank and what you liked and what you didn't, and not give me the professional sommelier you know outlook on it.
Would any of you happen to have an example of a mead that you saved based off of judges' feedback, where it started the year kind of, it's okay, and then you made an adjustment based on what you heard in early comp, and it kind of landed into world class, whether from this year or otherwise?
Uh, well, one mead I entered early last year, I had split it into two separate because I was playing with the flavors and I wasn't sure of the sweetness level, and I got it to where I thought I wanted it, and one judge said, "Well, this is really more on the low side of semi-sweet, not really semi-sweet." So I took the rest of it and I jacked up the sweetness a little, and I think that's the one that got me best to show in the Michigan Mead Cup when I adjusted the sweetness.
Yeah, I think a lot of my feedback was like process feedback that then later took to other batches in the future, not exactly that batch and then adjusted to then potentially win the same calendar year or whatever. But some of it was definitely around over extraction, like in my fruit bombs. Like sometimes when sometimes I leave the fruit on a little bit too long, and I was just adjusting with timing with that and playing around with a little bit of those levers. But I think that, and then also just some of the comments I kind of just throw away from judges in terms of like if I get a lot of counterproductive stuff, I just definitely look at the trends. But in terms of making adjustments in general, I just see, oh, like this meat is trending this way, and I keep entering it, or this meat is not trending well. I'm not going to enter it anymore in these competitions. Like I have a peach mead that has consistently scored in the 40s, but is not like it's not a great representation of both the balance of peach and honey. It's a beautiful drink. Everyone loves it when I give it to them because it's like it's a great beverage, but at the same time, it's a little bit more delicate. It doesn't have the components that some of the judges are looking for, especially when it's stacked up against like some cherry meads on the table at the stone fruit level. Um, but it's funny because it like goes to mini boss all the time, and I just kind of said, no, I'm just gonna save these bottles for me, and that's fine. I'm good with it. Like, it's fine.
Yeah, I think in my case, would probably be the muscadine piment that I make. So I usually will use names of friends that suggest it to me. So in this case, Gail Musser's a dear friend of ours and lives in Virginia, and he's like, you should make a muscadine mead, and I did, and it fared pretty well. The and I entered that. The only competition I entered that year was Domrus, and it actually did pretty well. And so then I made another batch of it, and I really didn't, but so I kind of adjusted the recipe based on a couple of judging feedbacks I got. And when I was done with that batch, I was like, well, this is really like to my palate. I'm like, well, this is okay. Like it didn't really blow me away. And that's, that won a Mazer Cup this year, or, during the 24, and it scored really well. So I was like, well, okay. So in that case, I took the judges' input to heart and tried to apply it, and it worked out really, really well for me. And that's not always the case, but in the case of that muscadine piment, it absolutely, the judges were the kind of the key, I think, to getting me over the hump.
And for those following along at home, that was the first place at Domrus on the Piment's table, and then is that the one that was named Thrill Found at Mazer?
Um, I don't
Oh,
remember.
pardon me, that was the berry mead. Ah,
Yeah. I usually just call that Musker's muscadine, and that won first place in the Mazer for that year
got it.
in the Piment category. Yeah.
Right. We do have a question in the chat from Eric. It's pretty all encompassing, a question around each of your must management practices, everything from aeration, storage, temperature control, nutrient additions. Would you mind each giving maybe a 1 or 2 minute rundown of how you approach a batch, how you manage it, as much as you're willing to share? Uh, Steve, would you mind kicking us off?
Okay, I was thinking there. I was like,
Yeah.
must management. Um, hmm. I do aerate. I do hit it with oxygen at the beginning, and I also use a little OptiWhite. Um, Temperature is going to be a function of the yeast I'm using, and it's
Mhm.
also for me in Minnesota, it's a function of the time of year. So it if I'm using Kvike, then I'm going to jack the temp up and make sure it's, in the high, or, at least the low 80s and or somewhere in the 90s. Nutrient additions, I'm pretty simple. I use DAP and Fermade K. I'm not using any fermentation tannins. Sometimes I'll use a little oak. Um, I always use, when stabilizing, I'll always use some potassium metabisulfite or K-meta, making sure that I'm, trying to doing my best to prevent any oxidation. I will, use some CO2 to purge. If I'm racking into a carboy, I'll purge the carboy with some CO2. That's about it. I try to keep it pretty simple.
Yeah, I would say mine's very simple as well. I don't really think about it too often. I just find out how much nutrient I need um, using calculators, and then I go from there. It is all dependent on the temperature in my house. Um, I live in a relatively similar climate as Steve. Doesn't get quite as cold up here in Vermont, but definitely basement is my friend a lot of the year. In the summer, I do some Kvike stuff. but I do most of my fermentation in the fall and winter, just because it's the natural flow of things for me. Most of my meads, I would say 85% of my meads are pretty big, kind of 14 to 16%. Ones that I want to, ones that, where I don't need to worry about as much, like I don't need to worry about them going bad as much, or I can sit on them for a while. A lot of the times I bring boxes of mead over to my folks' house about an hour and a half away and store it in their basement. And then when I have a competition coming up, I do a little shopping as I visit them. Um, but the reason my volume is so high with those kind of meads is just for simplicity's sake when it comes to storage. And I have a process down that I really like with if I start at a really high gravity, I pitch pretty high with my yeast. I do about 5 grams per gallon. Um, I like playing around with all sorts of yeasts to kind of finish things off. I really focus on trying to get the best fruit that I can and trying to adjust as I go along with managing how long the fruit sits in the mead, but also just giving it time, tasting it, bottling it when it's ready. Nothing crazy, but I use Fermento. I've been dabbling more with other nutrient protocols, just for simplicity's sake as well. But I'm a firm believer of if you get the nitrogen in there, that's a huge part of the battle. Um, but yeah, it's I've been lately I've been getting more into session meats just because I want to be able to drink more of my creations and share them at like festivals, and that's kind of something I want to get into later in this discussion is kind of where I'm going with mead. But yeah, I'll let Harper field that question.
Well, I'll tell you, I'm going to sound like a downright heathen compared to you two because I just kind of just let it fly. Like it's just I played around with using some of the Tanza scales and some of the methods like that, and I just didn't like any of the products. So I just went back to the drawing board and just stripped everything down. I'll make a mead. I don't do any heating. I just I call it the hot tub. I'll mix it in a sink of hot water, mix it up. I pour it in, and then I'll just pitch the yeast, and after I do the initial gravity reading, and let it go. So I don't do a lot of messing around with it. I don't you know tinker with it too much. I just let it fly, and then what I get at the end of the day is what I get at the end of the day. So it's I don't know that I'd say it's lazy, but every time I've tried to like really, really be, doing things from a high maintenance standpoint, I haven't been really liking the results. So I stripped all that down and I just really keep it bare bones. I just get the temperature right for the yeast I'm using, pitch it, and then I just let it go until and I'll do gravity checks. And when it's at the ABV I want, or, the gravity I want, then I'll just go ahead and rack it. And I never let anything go probably past 2 weeks at the rate my fermentation is. And I've gotten some comments from judges like, "Oh, this is really, this shows me you really know a good fermentation." I'm like, "Bro, this is just me, just kind of just winging it. There's no method to this madness. It's just sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But I don't put a lot of thought into it, and I don't really tinker with it as it's going through the fermentation process. And I don't get overly concerned with oxidation. I think mead is pretty resistant to a lot of things, and I've never had a oxidation critique on any of my meads, and I don't know how that is. Just something's working, so I'm just going to keep doing that. But I keep it really, really bare bones and simple because to me, that's the best result for me.
What kinds of adjustments are you making after fermentation, if at all?
So I don't. So I don't back sweeten. I never back sweeten any of my meads. I never have. So part of my initial recipe is what goes in the tank and through the fermentation process is what comes out. And so I don't back sweeten. I don't filter anything. Almost I'd say almost everything I submit, the clarity I get is just letting it sit and racking it. And sometimes that's at the expense of volume. And most times I'm only making, I'd rather make 10 1 gallon things just to see what I'm getting than one big one, because then I'm like, well, this is okay. And I'll give it to friends. But I make those 1 gallon batches. And if it takes a long time to clarify, I may be getting enough meat to push to a competition. And that's about it. But I like doing that. It's just a challenge. But yeah, I don't. Whatever comes out of the jug is what goes in the bottle for a competition. I don't mess with it.
I have a target in mind. So, for example, I'll have a target for when I make a pie mint, I want it to be like 8 to 10%. So I'll figure that out how much how much honey I need to get there. And it's probably going to ferment to dry or close to dry. And then I back sweeten. I'll sorbate and sulfite and back sweeten. And after that, I use super clear to fine it. And then it almost many things get kegged and carbonated. Or rarely, the exception is bottling in my case. And I I think I heard Harper say that you don't do staggered nutrient additions. I
I
don't.
don't.
I don't either. I'm I a lot, especially for a fruit meat. You've got fruit in there. You don't, it's there's a lot of nutrients in fruit. And I make sure to give my must proper nutrients. And unless I'm doing like some gigantic no water thing, I don't do staggered nutrient additions. And I got excoriated once and verbally tarred and feathered, but it's like, seems to work. So whatever.
Let's point Vokes at the scoreboard.
Yeah, I don't
No,
really follow a set regimen when it comes to nutrients. I just make sure I try to get a lot of try to calculate how much nutrient is in the must already. A lot of things I do make are on the really big side, so I do try to treat it a little bit carefully. But a lot of that's just um, me adding. Like I do usually use 1 or 2 additions total. If it's something on the more session side, everything up front. If it's something really big, I usually just do 2 additions because yeah, there is a lot of nutrient in there in the fruit, and it doesn't need a ton. So I don't like I probably could use even less. I just haven't really experimented with using less. Um, it's just one of those things where I started getting successful, and I haven't really like had too many seasons under my belt where I want to play around with that as much. But with the bigger meads, um, I've been liking just I kind of take a page out of a lot of the Polish books of starting at places where people don't want to even think about. Just going at that 1170 plus kind of thing for starting gravity. A 1.215 is not has been seen in my household, so it's something that I love when people are like, "Oh, you can't do this," and it's like, yeah, I just did it last week. Thanks, cool." So that's kind of what that's a lot of my philosophy on it. Is I like to prove people wrong, but I also like to make something good that I can share with my family and friends, and pick up some hardware is cool, but yeah,
Yeah, and I will, Steve's point, I will add some sorbate when it's time for it to try to get it stopped fermenting, and I will add some sulfite through the racking process. But that's about it. I've tried to do the math. I'm terrible at it. I've tried to figure out, do the calculation, how much honey I need and how much yeast I need, and it never works out for me. So I just kind of, mad scientist, and it seems to work okay. Simple's better for me.
So at the risk of being provocative. One question that we got prior to the panel was, what do you think your fellow competitors get wrong? What do you think folks do that holds them back?
We're talking in general, right? Not
Mhm.
this group. Okay.
Yeah, based off of not just you three against each other, but when you've been interacting with other competitors at competitions or within your homebrew clubs, what do you think holds mead makers back? Um,
I think that many mead makers don't understand balance. They don't understand that not every mead has to be 16% ABV and as sweet as it can be. And it's like they don't understand drinkability. Like, yeah, what are you gonna? How much of that are you gonna drink? A thimbleful? It's like, I really? It's like that's one of my pet peeves. Like, or sack. Really, everything needs to be sack? I don't think so.
Harper?
Well, I think that maybe taking judges' input a little too critically, and then you're kind of like, because I've had people like, well, I tried to compete and I didn't do well, and so I'm done with that. And it's like, well, I think maybe if you and I've experienced this, if you submit your mead to several competitions, you're going to get varying results, and you might actually end up winning something depending on when it does. I think just not getting back to the drawing board and being persistent. I think that um, I, like I never have been somewhere and I've tried some of these meat and been critical, because to me it's like, hey, you're trying to do something that really, if we're being honest, like this is kind of a niche thing, and not a lot of people do this, and more people need to do it because it's fun. And I'm more of a beer and whiskey guy, to be honest. I mean, I give probably 90% of what I make away, but I appreciate people that you just got to go back to the drawing board and then just keep honing your craft, because at some point you're going to break through that envelope and you'll be getting some of the results you want. And use your friends as guinea pigs. I know I do, right? And I've got a good friend of mine, Jeff Hyatt. He's a brewer, head brewer down at so he's a beer guy. He never really liked me, but I keep giving him mead, and I kept giving him mead, and kept giving him mead, and I visited him in Savannah. There's a little plug for Service Brewing down there, by the way. But he's like, he goes, finally, he goes, I drank a lot of crappy mead. He goes, and now you're finally getting it right, So just keep going back to the well. And I think if you're persistent and you don't take judges' input too critically, that you will refine a little bit and you'll get to where you want to be. Because really, at the end of the day, like like Kyle said, the hardware is all well and good, but if you can make something you can sit around and drink with your friends, that's the sweet spot.
Yeah, I would say a lot of I would say a lot of the people who are interested in getting Mead Maker of the Year, some of the things that I think they should focus on is that drinkability. The lower turnaround time is nice for session or like lower standard strength, not letting the alcohol get in the way. I've definitely becoming a little bit more of a convert on some of that stuff lately. And the other thing is just making a lot. You have to make a lot, either of different styles of mead or just. I mean, it's you're not gonna be able to compete with people who are doing this a lot and sending a lot of meads. If you're just sending one, if you're just making mead once a year, it's not going to do it. Your your one rep is not equaling other people's 30 to 75 reps. Like it's not doing it, and you're not going to get anywhere quickly with that mindset. And I know a lot of people don't really want to hear that. They want to get it just right and learn from people when it comes to like recipe formulation, other things like that. But you need to throw your palate in the ring too. Tasting your things, tasting other people's things, commercial examples, beers, spirits, wines. you got to really throw yourself out there when it comes to your sensory. Um, so I think people just kind of limit themselves by lack of exposure, lack of experimenting, a little bit of just laziness when it comes to that, which is which is fine. But if you really want to compete with us, you gotta. That's what you gotta do. Is you gotta kind of dive a little deeper than you think.
And to compete, you need to have a thick skin. You need to, not everything is going to do well, and you might think it's the best thing in the world. Uh, maybe, maybe not, And if you're willing to listen and hear what people are or how people are reacting to your mead, that can help.
Along the lines of feedback, question from Eric in the chat. If you are a member of a homebrew club, what role have they played in the development of your mead?
For me, it was huge. Back in the you know, some years ago, the St. Paul Homebrewers Club won Homebrew Club of the Year 3 years in a row. It was like 2007, 8, 9, or something like that. I forget the exact years, but we had a lot of people in the club making mead, and we were all pushing each other. We were all trying each other's mead, and we were all very competitive in a friendly way. And we'd give each other crap if we beat someone, and they would give us a crap when they beat me, and or that's But at the same time, we were super honest with one another, and we were tasting meads and giving each other feedback, and so it was huge for me.
I bring a lot of mead to my homebrew club. I'm the mead guy. And I mean, it honestly hasn't like blown my doors open in the mead. We're traveling to Valkyrie's Horn, traveling to like various regional competitions. Stepping outside my comfort zone and getting out there has been way more instructive to my mead practice. But at the same time, I'm trying to foster another mead community. I'm trying to push my club to do mead related things. I'm trying to get the mindset on mead. So I see that as my role to introduce people to what mead could be, and I think I've done some of that, but there's definitely work to be done there. But I would say it's been like a little bit of an avenue for me to share my mead with people who appreciate other beverages. So it's nice in its own way.
Yeah, and I agree. With Kyle is that here locally, I'm not a member of a homebrew. We have a local homebrew, but that's pretty much just a beer club. And I will take mead over there, and there are people that make wine, and so I get a lot of important feedback. But where I really started getting a lot of good interactions was, going to Domrus and going to a couple of the competitions, and meeting Bill Boyer, because then just pinging ideas off of Bill. So he's been invaluable to me because, I'll call him. I always joke. I'm like, is this the meat hotline? And he's like, what do you got? I'm like, I'm trying to figure this out. And I'm like, I'm going to send you a bottle. Let me know what you think. And, he and Matt Mead and some other people, but just sitting at competitions, I would tell people that are, again, to the previous question, that are feeling like they're trying to break through, man, just go to a mead competition locally or one of the big ones and just watch, see how the judging goes, talk to people. I mean, there's a ton of mead that you can try, and you can talk to people and say, man, that's really good. What is that? Because then you can, if you see something that you really like, you can try to replicate it and clone it. But I think going to mead competitions is key for me, just because I don't really have a big mead making community here. But getting out there and talking to people, it's very, very helpful. And then just it's a little social network, and I call people and just ask questions and say, how did you do that? Because I've tried to do it 4 times and it's an abysmal failure every time I try to do it. So it's just that fine tuning you can get.
Right, and that's important. And maybe they might not give you all the details, but they maybe will point you in the right direction, and it's kind of a level of trust. Um, I you don't want to give away all your secrets, at least unless you know someone, you trust them and you respect them. And it's like there's a lot of people who just want their hand held and like give me all the things so I can do that. I was like, well, why should I do that? You need to learn, and you're not going to learn anything necessarily if you don't like make a few mistakes.
I'd love to spend, if you'll humor me, my colleague Kevin Mindsma put together some statistics on each of your different entries. And I then took a look at which of your entries medaled more than once across the competition circuit. Um, so Steve, Chateau Fletty took a second place Pyment at Mazer Cup, second place Pyment at Valhalla, and won Best of Show at Valkyrie's Horn. Can you talk to us about it and why you think it did so well?
That's how I got into mead making. Way back in 2002, I was doing a BJCP class, beer judging class, and we did a mead night. I was like, wait a minute, this isn't on the test. Why are we doing a mead night? And literally, we had 60 different meads that night. And I was like, 60 different meads. I was like, too sweet. Oh, too sweet. And then I had this um, uh, orange blossom Riesling Pyment. It was like the rays of heaven were shining down on me. I was like, I need to do this, and so it took me a while. I didn't know anyone who made it, and I had to do my research, and so it's something I've been making, yeah, for almost more than 20 years, and it's the first mead that I won Best of Show at or Mead Maker of the Year at AHA. So I kind of have it figured out. So I kind of know what I'm doing with that one. And it's the reason I got into mead making, one of the reasons I still make mead, because it's just something I really like. It's an orange blossom Riesling Pyment. Sometimes it's an orange blossom Gewürztraminer Pyment. Um, but generally the same thing, like semi-sweet sparkling. Really fun. I like it a lot.
That's the one that's on the BJCP website, yes?
Yeah, I think
All
so.
right. I personally appreciate that one. All right. Harper, I'm curious about Smoking Jacket. I read in the mouse over on, I think it was the Valkyrie's Horn website, that it's a smoked peach mead.
The smoking jacket is actually a
Or pardon me,
smoked
smoked
cherry.
cherry. That's it.
Yes.
Um,
So
and it won first place at Valkyrie's Horn in experimental semi-sweet and took a bronze at Indiana Brewers Cup in specialty mead. Tell us about it.
so again, that was I'll go to friends and say, what fruit do you like, and what do you want me to try to make for you? And this friend's like, I want a smoked cherry. And I'm like, hmm. So there were several tragic attempts to do this, and because like, how am I going to get smoke? Like, you don't want to use like the artificial barbecue, smoke. And I tried to use wood smoke to infuse it, and it never took. And again, like, I made that one particularly because I really like cocktails. I'm like, this would be like, I want to make a good mead that would make a good mead cocktail. And I was talking to a bartender, and she looked at me. She goes, "Smoked tea," and I went, "Really?" And she goes,
Oh,
"Yeah, smoked tea." And I know I'm going to mangle the name. It's Lapsang Sudong, and I used one tea bag of that in primary, and it just turned out beautifully. And I've stuck with that recipe ever since. But it's just, you know, a bartender who knows how to make a good cocktail told me how to get smoke into my mead, and the rest is proverbial history.
Yeah, that tea is insane. It's so good. I use it all the time, so it's great to hear that you do as well.
interesting. Billy at Lost Cause, that's uses that as well, and Wolf, I think.
Am I remembering correct, Kyle? There's a competition that you're involved with that has a selected ingredient. Is that the same tea as that one?
No, this year it's hojicha, which is a roasted green tea, not a smoked black tea.
Got it.
Roasted green tea is more, it has more like, uh, I would say like medium light roast coffee, a little bit of chocolate, and then a little bit of the matcha green character still there, but not a ton. So it's definitely a different world. But playing with tea is, I think, something that a lot of mead makers should do. What are people familiar with pairing with honey tea? It's just like something that just rings right off the tongue. So um, that's really cool that you use that, especially with cherry. And I want some of that right now.
Are you doing that? You said primary?
Yeah, I do that in primary. I don't do anything in secondary because it gets really smoky. And again, talking about judges, like that does really well, and you get a judge who doesn't like the smoke character, and it does
I
not do so well. But
Yeah,
for those of you taking notes, Russian caravan tea also works very well for that.
So
interesting.
last but not least, Kyle, uh, do you say it VTHOD or do you
Yeah, just
expand it?
Vermont Heart of Darkness.
Vermont Heart of Darkness
Yeah.
won first place fruit and third place best of show at Indiana Brewers Cup. First place Malamel at Michigan Mead Cup. First place Malamel and best of show at Valhalla, and somehow only got second at Mazer Cup. Uh, Talk us through the blackcurrant, red raspberry, and morello cherry multiple medal winner.
So that one, I was actually upset that I sent it to so many places because I really just wanted it for myself and for like verticals for future years. So I'm glad that was my first attempt at it. Basically, it's just one of my friends opened a bottle of Heart of Darkness, and I just wanted to try and make that kind of my own, using things local to me, local local Vermont honey, and then cherries and black currants and raspberries that I could find. And I would just make friends with farmers and talk with them. A lot of them are super passionate about what they do, and it's nice to have that element of the hobby in there where I'm not just I'm sharing things with people who appreciate fruit, and I can then share the mead with them at the end, which is really nice. Um, but I wanted to make something that I was really proud of. I'm glad that judges liked it as well. It's over the top in every kind of way, which is one of those kind of things of like the Pepsi versus Coke, where you take a little sip and at a best of show table, and it can really stand out. But it's not really like it's not something that is an everyday drinker. It's a wedding toast kind of thing. It's a mead that has a lot of significance to me. It just uses a lot of fruit. I would say the most important part's the ratios. Um, Basically equal parts raspberry and cherry. Uh, Morello type. I like the darker fleshed cherries that have a lot of tartness, but are also not of the sweet variety. And then the black currants. That's a really big key to have them not overpower the other fruits. So I did I think it was 4 pounds in the 5 gallon batch, so quite a bit less fruit than the other two, which comprised of around 40 pounds of fruit. So um, that allowed a blackcurrant thread to get through, but not dominate the other flavors. But at that point, it's so much fruit. It's so big, and I wouldn't recommend a lot of people making that. It does well at competitions, but it's not really like it's something that I wish I just had in my basement, really.
Yeah, me too. My basement, from the sounds of it.
Oh, so those were some of the good ones. Just out of curiosity, so Eric asks in the chat, what went wrong with your worst batch? Was there any mead that you had high hopes for this year that just didn't work out, and what went wrong with it? Anything experimental or trying a new technique? Thought it was going to make it, but didn't quite, or was just unlucky.
Hmm.
Well, go ahead, Steve.
Oh, I know. I was like, I didn't have anything I totally messed up this year. Um, hmm. I've been trying to clone. Carvin has a like, what is that? A cucumber lime meat. I've been trying to make that, and I just haven't been able to get it right. It was just, it's the balance is off. And I was like, maybe I should read the instructions more closely and not
Hmm.
try to wing it so much.
Too much vegetable, too much lime.
It was too sweet. Too
Hmm.
sweet. I think I don't. Yeah, I don't know. Some people don't seem to like cucumbers. I don't know. Maybe too much. I think maybe too much cucumber peel. Maybe I don't know.
Okay. So looping back to one of the questions earlier on, can you identify the bias in the different regions or competitions? Can you describe it? And and did that change what you send where?
Yeah, I mean, I changed completely what I sent to Valhalla this year. I didn't send anything with any complexity. I
Hmm.
sent simple things that wouldn't make judges think about, like, wait a minute, three ingredients? Like, it's just, yeah, and
Interesting.
sweeter things.
Okay.
I I really don't put that much thought into it, honestly. Like I just, I try to, and again, because I'm usually just barely ahead of the power curve for submitting things, just because of the small batches I make. And full disclosure, during 2024, I'd probably say 40% of the things that I had sent to competitions. This is not a humble brag, but it was like the first time I sent them just because I had to send something, right? Like I want to send 10 if it requires 10. So I'm like, well, let's see how it does. And then if it doesn't do so well, I'll take the judge's feedback and I'll try to, improve on that recipe. But I try not to anticipate that much because in years future when I'm doing this, like I want to have enough of an arsenal, so I'm sending pretty much consistently the same thing to all the competitions. You know, hopefully with enough fine tuning that they will each, um, you know, from a scoring standpoint, be fairly consistent. Like for me, it's got to be. I have to be more consistent because 2024 I was kind of just all over the place. I'm like, yes, coming out of the gate strong, and then I'm struggling to get stuff out the door. I'm like, well, kind of fading here in the middle. So it's just one of those things that not geographically, just I think more consistent with what I'm submitting.
Yeah, I definitely resonate with Steve's point. I think when you're addressing regional bias, you have to think about it's just there's probabilities that like at some places in the country there are probabilities your meat is going to get in front of someone that has a certain type of palate. So like yeah, in at Valhalla, for example, there was one of my meads that I thought was maybe too complex for the judges that I was thinking was gonna bomb, but did well. And I was kind of shocked at that. But that's because like people I recognized on the score sheet were like judging it, and they were people that they were grandmaster and like they had some I could tell they knew what honey, like what mead was, and they weren't just people showing up that day. But I had some score sheets from there that was just people showing up that day, and if that mead went in front of them, I don't know. I don't think that that would have worked out so well for me. So I've definitely had that happen where like it gets in front of the right person at the right time sometimes, and that's where it's like, yeah, Steve's absolutely right by setting himself up for success with, trying to send the things that he think could do well in that region. I don't think it's like it's not a cookie cutter kind of answer where it's like, oh, Valkyrie's Horn, it's just this type of mead. It's like it's not really that simple, but at the same time, it's a numbers game. Just like with how many meads we enter, with how many types of meads, it's a lot of it is you. A lot of my strategy is just making things that could go to mini boss, and then from there, it's it's all it's all kind of up in the air, but I want something that could potentially go there. So I don't really look at like when I started competing, I really looked at, okay, what's my hit rate for mini boss? And then like last year, I really looked at, oh, well, like, wow, a lot of those mini bosses of last year are now turning into getting medals and stuff. So that's kind of what I was looking at, but it was just following that trend.
So looking at the present leaderboard for 2025, I can't help but call out that none of y'all are on it. Um, are you taking years off, or are you thinking about how you'll approach 2026?
I'm semi-retired. I'm taking the year off. Yeah.
I'm not eligible this year with the change of amateur status. I was in quality assurance at a brewery a few years ago. I never really touched yeast, or I basically was just doing normal quality work in food and beverage. I was at Ben and Jerry's before that, and I would say I learned more about mead making after I left than when I was there. Just to be completely out front about it. What I'm doing now is I'm currently working with a brew pub, trying to get more session meads out, help them with, expanding mead in Vermont in a really small scale. Um, the other thing I'm doing is trying to do things in my homebrew club and attend some festivals in the region for pouring, and just trying to like really establish some mead in New England. I know there's Mead Free or Die a ways back, but I don't necessarily know if I can bring that again, but I want to bring something to my region.
That's exciting. Will any of the flavor profiles from your medal winners this year make it into the brew pub, do you think?
Um, well, a lot of the things I meddled with were these big sack bombs, so I transferred a little bit over to just the hydromel game, and everything under 7%, um, between off dry and semi sweet. I started earning some medals like at a Valkyrie's Horn this past year. I got a gold with a hydromel, so I was pretty happy with that. I did win with a hydromel this last season as well, but just I'm kind of changing my focus on tap with like what I actually drink for mead is like currently right now I have a semi-sweet raspberry mango lime mead, and then I have a osmanthus apricot off dry mead that both are 5%, like super refreshing this time of year. And I I really love having, I usually have a dry 5% trad, just, and I kind of want that to be more of the trend for mead in general, and not what I started making.
How dry is dry? What's your final gravity on a dry mead? Is there a little residual sweetness there?
Yeah, so I usually do uh 2 to 4 points. Nothing crazy, but it also depends on like what the honey's giving me, what the fermentation like I just balance it to taste at that point, but usually the hydrometer is not too much over one, but it's definitely under 1.005. But if there's like other fruits and stuff involved, I can bring that up to 1.010 kind of thing. But I like to I really like having some floral components in some of these lighter meads, just
Yeah.
to complement some of the honey notes. and just increase the complexity in something that is so sessional.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, that's kind of where I'm going. I'm still gonna make like Heart of Darkness once a year, pick all the fruits that I can, that kind of thing. But they're gonna stay in my basement. I'm gonna do verticals and stuff.
It's hard to give those away.
Yeah, and I personally am not going to be competing this year. I started a new job and was overcome by events, and so by the time the registrations opened up and closed, I had totally missed the boat. So this year, I'm pretty much just trying some new recipes, experimenting with a lot of stuff. To Steve's point with the cucumber lime, um, I'm exploring a lot of flavors, like from like a cooking aspect, what flavors combine well. Some of these are a little bit outrageous, and I'll probably submit some of those to some small competitions, see how they do, fine tune them a little bit, and just kind of just build up a little bit more of a stockpile, so I'm not so far behind the power curve every time I need a bottle, 30 bottles of 12 ounces to get sent out somewhere, and I'm just looking for something I can send to fill a category and be a little bit more deliberate in my planning process here for the competitions coming up.
Got it. Well, I'll open it up to folks from the audience. Are there any questions you'd like to ask our panelists before we close out tonight? Okay. Well, Steve, Kyle, Harper, congratulations again. Thank you so much for your time and your sharing tonight. It's been a privilege to get to chat with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Congrats, guys.
Thank you very much. It was nice talking to everybody and nice virtually meeting, and I look forward to seeing all of you and everybody in the meat community at some of these competitions so we can trade some ideas and get some good recipe ideas
That'd be
moving
great.
forward.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. That concludes episode 20 of Mead Matters.